In this series, we're going to start looking at the minor pentatonic scale, and in this first lesson, we're going to go over what it is, why it's so useful, and how it's constructed. Now, I just want to point out I'm not going to be going through scale patterns in this video. This is just all the information that it's good to know when getting started, and then from the next video, we're going to start looking at each pattern individually. The minor pentatonic scale is one of, if not the most commonly used scale on guitar. It's extremely versatile and probably most heavily associated with blues and blues-inspired styles like rock and metal, but it can definitely be heard in the majority of genres. So just to give you some examples right off the bat, a really good one is the intro solo to Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor by Arctic Monkeys, because he essentially just runs up the minor pentatonic scale. But if you're into more classic stuff, the main solo towards the end of Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac is a good one. And if you're into more modern stuff, the main hook from Blinding Lights by The Weeknd also just uses the minor pentatonic scale. I think it's good to have a few examples in your head so you can really start associating the sound with the scale, because after all, scales only exist because of their specific sonic characteristics. So if we get into the qualities of the scale, obviously we're looking at the minor pentatonic. There is also a major pentatonic, but minor tends to be the common place to start, especially on guitar, because loads of lead parts and solos use it. Now, when we think of minor, we generally think of the musical element as having quite a sad sound, especially if you think about the difference between major and minor chords. But I wouldn't say that the minor pentatonic sounds particularly sad. It sounds more kind of just cool and neutral, as opposed to the bright and cheery sound that the major pentatonic gives you. I would also say that it doesn't have quite as much of a bleak or dreary sound as the full natural minor scale. There's plenty of music which uses the minor pentatonic which still sounds quite upbeat and energetic, like the examples I mentioned before. So just because it's called minor, don't be thinking that it's just this super sad sounding thing. In terms of terminology, it can actually be quite helpful to understand where the name comes from. So if we take pentatonic and break it down, first of all, we've got penta, which is derived from Greek, meaning 5, just like a pentagon has 5 sides. And tonic means note, so when we put them together, pentatonic roughly translates as 5 note, and I'm sure you'll be able to guess that the pentatonic scale has 5 notes in it. This is one of the reasons it's so useful, because other scales, for example your full major and minor scales, actually have 7 notes in, and that's why the 8th one, when you reach the root note again, would be known as the octave. But those extra notes that get added are a little bit risky, and you've got to make sure you use them in the right places. Whereas with pentatonic scales, they remove them risky notes, so you can pretty much just explore freely, and everything you play will probably sound at worst okay. And the focus is much more on phrasing and expression through techniques like slides and bends and hammer-ons and pull-offs, rather than having much of a focus on just note choice. Now when I say it has 5 notes, that's per octave, so basically 5 different note names. For example, in the A minor pentatonic scale, we have A, C, D, E, and G, but obviously when you practice on your instrument, you're going to be playing more than just 5 individual notes, because you're going to continue to play those notes into different octaves. So just to give you an example, if I play the A minor pentatonic scale, we've got notes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then if I continue into the next octave, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or to give them their note names, we've got A, C, D, E, G, and then again A, C, D, E, G. And you can continue to play those notes for as high or as low as the range on your instrument extends. Apologies if you can hear a bit of rain, it is absolutely hammering down right now. But anyway, getting into some more guitar specific stuff, we have to be aware on guitar that we can play the same notes in multiple places, unlike a piano, for example, where you just get all the notes laid out nicely in order from lowest to highest. For example, if I play the note of the high E string, I can play it here, here, I can play it here, here, and here. So you can play all the notes in different places on guitar, and the effect that that has is basically we end up with different layouts of scales in different octaves and in different areas of the neck, which we call patterns. So if I play you an octave of the minor pentatonic scale in pattern 1, that would sound like this. And then here's the same octave in pattern 2, pattern 3, and so on. Now I'm going to get into why it's a good idea to learn all the patterns, even though there's a bit of overlap in the sound in a second, but for now it's important to know that we have 5 patterns in total, which we just label as patterns 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and after pattern 5 you would start again from pattern 1 in the next octave. So it's better to think of these patterns as working on like a conveyor belt cycle system, rather than pattern 1 being the start and pattern 5 being the end. So yeah, why bother learning all the different patterns if they pretty much sound the same? Well, the easy answer is that they don't, because they all have a slightly different range. For example, in pattern 1, I can only get the pitch so high, whereas in pattern 4 I can get it much higher. So you have access to different notes in different patterns, and a good strategy when improvising and writing guitar solos is to start quite low in pitch and then gradually raise it as the section gets a little bit more climactic or dramatic, and you wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't know the different patterns. But possibly a more important reason is that in different patterns you're going to end up with different fingers on each scale note, and that means that you're going to be forced to play different licks and incorporate different type of bends and essentially just unlock different melodic possibilities in each scale, and that means that your playing is going to be a lot less repetitive, you're going to have a lot more variety and avoid just playing the same pet licks all the time. So from the next video, we're going to start looking at each pattern individually. Now it's really important that you only try and learn one pattern at a time. Make sure you've got each pattern memorized and you can make music out of it before you move on to the next one. Otherwise it just becomes extremely confusing and you just get all the different shapes muddled up. I always warn students about trying to learn all 5 patterns at once, and the ones who've ignored that advice have always really struggled for that reason. So please, just one scale at a time. Now for the final part of this video, I'm going to go into a bit of theory, so I'm going to be talking about intervals and the scale construction. Now you definitely don't need to know this stuff to actually start using the scale, so if you find the theory a little bit confusing or overwhelming, just ignore it for now. Definitely don't let it put you off learning the patterns, just get them learned and start making music with them, and then you can always reverse engineer the theory later if you want to. That's exactly what I did, and probably what a lot of other players did as well. However, if you are at a stage where you're ready to start diving a bit deeper into concepts, I would advocate taking this stuff on board, because you'll find that you're able to manipulate the scale a lot better, and you can also use it as a template to add new notes and intervals to in order to build new scales and just increase your repertoire and knowledge going forward. So in our 5-note minor pentatonic scale, we've got a root note, a minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor seventh, and then we'd reach the octave of the root note again. So once more, that is root, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor seventh, and then into the next octave, we'd have root, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor seventh, and reach the octave again. So the main intervals we're missing are the 2nd and 6th intervals, and these are the ones you would add to your 5-note pentatonic scale to turn it into a 7-note diatonic scale, such as the full natural minor scale, which is also known as the Aeolian mode, but you could also do this to create other minor modes such as Dorian and Phrygian, depending on which combination of major or minor 2nd and 6ths you added to your original 5 notes. This means that if you stick to the original 5-note pentatonic scale, it's actually neutral amongst all the minor modes because it omits any of the mode-specific notes. Now, this means that you can use the minor pentatonic scale in a really wide variety of situations, whether you're using a song or a backing track that's just in a minor key, or maybe it's a progression from a Dorian scale, or even just a 12-bar blues 1-4-5 progression. The minor pentatonic scale will be a really useful and comfortable scale to use in all of these different situations, but also, as I've mentioned, you can use it as a template to add extra notes to play more specifically to all those different types of progressions, which will just enable you to widen your sonic palette going forward. I hope that's helped you gain an understanding or deepen your knowledge of the minor pentatonic scale. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at each pattern individually throughout this series, starting with pattern 1 in the next video. And for each pattern, we're going to be looking at the scale shape, we're going to look at the finger options, the root locations, where the good bends are, and learn a lick in each pattern so you have somewhere to get started when you actually start using them. But as I've mentioned, you shouldn't learn all 5 at once, so take them slowly, make sure you know each one before you move on to the next. In the description below, you'll find links to the full Minor Pentatonic series, as well as some extra resources on my Patreon page, such as scale diagrams and guitar tabs. Be sure to subscribe for more guitar lessons, and I'd really appreciate you giving the video a like if you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the scale pattern lessons.